All right. I think I was accidentally making people look up my nose in my last video. I apologize for that. Working with what I got here. So, anyways, what I was thinking of today was the upcoming sort of post-work era that we are inevitably hurtling towards. I mean, I've somewhat into computer science, and I've been keeping up with the advances in AI, and it is pretty staggering. There's things that are pretty impressive that these things can do. Although there's a lot of negatives to it as well. But the main thing I was thinking of today is the sort of the greatest danger that comes along when machines are basically capable of doing everything for us. Because people may be surprised in some cases to realize how much of their sense of self-worth is tied in with what they do for work, or how they make money, their job, their title. Um, our society seems to really be focused on this, and when that sort of crutch, when your main source of kind of escaping from the feelings of damaged self-worth that most of us have suddenly goes away, you are suddenly confronted with a flood of feelings that you do not want to deal with. It's I mean, there's a reason why it's considered trauma. It's an emotion that is so big that it cannot really be looked at all at once and tends to hide in the subconscious and sort of drive your actions in a direction that is meant to sort of prevent you from having to actually look at or feel those emotions. And with this sort of exponential growth of technology that's been going on for quite some time now, I can kind of see some potential options of where things might be going, and not all of them are pretty. But I think that there will be multiple different sort of subsections of people that choose to go in different directions. I don't think it's going to be a, rise of the machines, everybody dies kinds of thing. I think it might even be a little creepier than that in some ways. There was this movie I saw a while back. It wasn't a particularly good movie, but it did have an interesting sort of premise. It was called Surrogates. It had Bruce Willis in it. Like I said, it wasn't a great movie, but the idea is in the future there are these people who basically live in like tubes, these pods where they are fed through a tube, and all their biological functions are taken care of in this tube, and they live in a virtual reality world where I believe in the movie you weren't in a virtual reality. You were actually like sort of living in someone else's body. You were like there were people who volunteered to get paid to be surrogates, and people could live their life for them. I think I might be mixing two movies, but the general idea is that you basically live in a tube in a permanent state of escapism, and I can totally see this actually happening. Where if you run into this situation where the rug kind of gets pulled out from underneath the whole world, where nobody really has much to do anymore, and their primary source of self worth and value is taken away, and now you're replaced by a machine that can do what you do, only faster, better, and cheaper. There's a bit of an existential crisis that comes along with that. I would know. I worked as a freelance writer for a long time before my whole life kind of blew up at some point. And now I don't get any of that kind of work because it all goes to AI. In fact, now people do something kind of insidious where they will find you on freelance platforms, say they want to work with you, and ask you to send them examples of your work. And so you send them examples to see if they like what you do, see if you want to work together. But what they actually do is they take your examples, they feed it into their own AI agent, and tell it to write articles with your voice and with your ideas. So uh, be wary of that if you're a freelancer. There's a lot of that going around right now. Give them small snippets of your work. Don't give them full completed works, and they just ghost on you. They just disappear. They never intended on working with you in the first place. But as entertainment becomes more and more immersive and more accessible, and at the same time, our sort of sense of purpose gets ripped away, I can see a significant portion of the population going down this permanent escapism route, where they just live in a permanent state of like virtual reality, video games, movies, whatever, where you just spend your entire life hiding from these sorts of feelings that come up in relation to this sort of shift. And there will be others who would rather heal from the wounds that they have been distracted from for so long. And there will be another group that, I mean, if I say it too directly, I think YouTube will flag me. You'll probably get where I'm going with this. There will be probably a disturbing increase in the self-unalivings that happen around the world, at least for a while. It'll be, I mean, I think people really underestimate just how much our entire society has staked on the idea that productivity and money and position and work are what give you value as a human being. And so eventually, people like myself might be pretty busy. So businesses like what I'm trying to do here are going to become pretty important. People who were kind of forced to go through something similar to this before, this sort of the AI and automation and everything kind of basically just handles everything. We'll have a little bit more of a idea of how to handle this sort of stuff. This process I'm always talking about in all my videos. You can call it, you know, uh, spiritual transformation, magical initiation, Jungian individuation, the great work of alchemy, whatever you want to call it. This process that was catalyzed by this experience of going through the Golden Dawn system of self-initiation, it kind of forced me into a position where I had really no choice but to have to deal with something very similar. So not only did my job just disappear, the one job I really ever had that I really felt good about and that I could consistently do and was taking care of me and felt like I was really finally getting in a stable direction, and suddenly it just gets ripped away. Well, at the same time that that happened, I also lost my place to live, and when I went to go stay at the hotel I was going to stay at, my car broke down in the parking lot, and as I ran out of money living at this hotel because I'm no longer making money, living in a city where I don't really know anybody, I end up in a homeless shelter. And as I'm in this homeless shelter, I find that none of my efforts, nothing I do seems to have any effect on anything that's meant to cause an actual change in my physical circumstance, a meaningful change towards any kind of stability was just utterly fruitless. It just did not work. Or I would run into like a series of the most absurd, unlikely negative synchronicities that sort of just blocked my path. That's kind of been the theme that I've been dealing with for quite a long time now, is that it's kind of like manifest or die at this point. But my point is, as I was living in this place and kind of got stuck there for much longer than I ever expected to have to spend in a place like that, I was kind of in an environment where that sense of, that self worth that we mostly try to hide from, that most people will probably deny even exists, was being just shoved in my face on a daily basis. I mean, one of the hardest things about living in a shelter is not just the experience of being homeless, but the sort of self opinion, the way that you view yourself in light of a situation like that, where all those times you might have driven past a homeless person and looked down on them or judged them, been like, oh well, they should have just done this or that, and then suddenly you find yourself in that position through really no fault of your own, through just the convergence of coincidences coming together from different areas all at once beyond your control. Now all of a sudden at you're in the position that you once believed was like the very bottom of the barrel, and it doesn't feel good, and you have to basically have no choice, or at least I had no choice but to sit there and just process, the majority of inner work I think I've done in my life was done over the last 5 years while I was stuck being homeless. I lived in one shelter for about 9 months. I would experience this series of like problems that would come up, like people or groups of people, that would come up that would be like a triggering circumstance. I would do what I can to try to change it or fix it. My physical efforts would fail completely, and then I would have no choice but to just address the feelings that come up and process that sort of trauma that's getting triggered. And I began to notice that as I did this, the circumstances themselves that I couldn't seem to change, no matter how hard I tried, would just kind of disappear. Like the circumstance would like decrease in intensity as the feeling that I was processing inside of me was decreasing until it was gone, and then the circumstance would just resolve itself. So and you see this happen over and over and over again. When you keep running into situations, a problem comes up, you try to solve it with normal mundane action like anyone would. It for some reason just does not have any effect on the situation. But then all of a sudden you see the situation resolve itself at the same time that you're working on whatever the feeling it triggers in you. You see this enough times, you start to kind of have to be like, okay, there's something happening here. This is not just my imagination. This is a real thing, And let's see. And they moved me to a new, nicer shelter where you could, stay inside if you needed to, have your own bunk and like a locker and stuff like that. Still, the entire time I lived there, it was the same thing. A whole new set of different issues would come up. And being in a shelter where you're living in a dorm, shared with like 30 or 40 other people, and there are staff members who have their own weird personality disorder type issues they're trying to take out on you. You're in a position where you no longer have the ability to hide. There's nowhere to go, and you have no choice, and you end up facing a lot of things that you would never willingly deal with on your own if you had a choice. So I spent several years going through all of this. So um, until eventually I must have hit some kind of critical threshold, because I noticed ever since from the moment that I lost my place to live till right now, there has been a steady and consistent decline in the amount of sort of chaos and intrusive situations and triggering events that has happened. This all happened right at the very end of the portal grade of the ceremonial magic system, the Golden Dawn system that I went through. I finished that grade, and the very next thing that happened was my whole life exploded, and I had to go into this situation where I now have no choice but to apply what I learned through that process as like as a matter of like survival. So it's no longer an intellectual game or a weekend thing that you get into. But I guess eventually I reached some sort of critical threshold where suddenly, purely through coincidence and things that really had nothing to do with efforts of my own, other than signing a few pieces of paper people put in front of me, I end up in a place of my own. But the process still continues to this day. I don't want to pretend like I am a master and I have just completed the great work entirely and that's it. It's a long process for some of us, for most, I think. Probably everyone, but it's going to be different depending on, what your sort of psychological makeup is from your own childhood experiences and your cultural experiences. But even sitting here today, I still seem to face the exact same sort of issue where I still work on things, I still try to find some way to just you know, change circumstances with effort the way that anyone would, but it just never seems to work. The most ridiculous, unlikely things all start converging, like things that would be unlikely by themselves, but then they start happening in like patterns and clusters and happening all at the same time. So when that starts happening, when your whole life is now just nothing but unlikely events converging at the same time, it really kind of forces you to shift your perspective on what is real, what is the real nature of reality, you know um, and here I am now, after trying literally everything I can possibly think of. Every avenue of mundane effort seems to be absolutely blocked, and it just seems to make things far worse when I try to approach things that way. So it's like it's manifest or die now. It's all magic, or whatever word you want to use to describe this process of the connection between your inner and outer reality. And I figure, well, I guess I could make some YouTube videos and see where things go. But, there's really no point in trying to follow any kind of prescribed path forward or try to take a page out of anyone else's book, because if all of those other things I've tried to do run into whatever, higher force, this manifestational force forcing me where I am, then it really doesn't matter which way I try to do whatever, because it's going to end up being whatever ends up happening will come about usually through some unexpected source. And so I may as well just kind of make videos the way I want to, talk about things, put out ideas. If anybody wants readings or wants any kind of to get into detail on any of this stuff or a natal chart or uh, anything of that sort, I'm there. I've got a website where you can contact me, or you can just send me an email directly. Um, Anyways, that's what I was thinking about. Just the overall idea of when automation takes over pretty much everyone's jobs at some point. That's the main thing that I think we're all going to have to really deal with. Um, Anyways, I'm going to stop the video here. Thanks for watching and take care.